Have you ever felt too small to make a difference in the world? Have you ever thought that your origins, your history, your limitations are obstacles to something great? The story you are about to hear is proof that God uses simple people to accomplish great purposes. Today in Lessons in Faith, you will meet Esther, a young orphan who became queen and with courage saved all her people from destruction. But her journey was not easy. And yours doesn't have to be either. It all began many years ago in the Persian Empire. The Jews lived as foreigners in that land, far from their homeland. Among them was a young woman named Hadassah, better known as Esther. She was an orphan. She lost both her parents when she was still a child. She was raised by her cousin, Mordecai, a man of integrity and faithfulness to God. Esther grew up in humility, but she carried within her a special beauty, not only physical, but also inner. At that time, King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes, ruled over 127 provinces, from India to Ethiopia. One day during a feast, Queen Vashti disobeyed the king and was deposed. The throne was left vacant, and so a decree was issued. All the most beautiful young women in the kingdom were to be taken to the royal palace so that the king could choose a new wife. Esther was one of those chosen. A young Jewish woman, unknown, simple, suddenly in the middle of the most powerful empire in the world. She went through a long period of preparation. A whole year with perfumes and special care. But it wasn't her appearance that caught the king's attention. It was her grace, her wisdom, and her sweetness. Esther was chosen. God had placed a young Jewish woman on the throne of Persia. But there was still a secret. No one knew that she was from the Jewish people. Meanwhile, a new character emerges. Haman, an arrogant and cruel man, elevated to the position of the king's right-hand man. Haman hated the Jews, especially Mordecai, who refused to bow down to him. Driven by hatred, Haman devised an evil plan to annihilate all the Jews in the empire. And the king, unaware of the details, authorized the decree. The day of the slaughter was set. Fear spread among God's people. Mordecai, upon hearing of the decree, tore his clothes, covered himself with sackcloth and ashes, and went to the palace gates. He sent a message to Esther, begging for help. But Esther hesitated. To go to the king without being summoned could mean death. It was against the law, and the king had not summoned her for 30 days. It was then that Mordecai responded with words that echo to this day. Who knows if you were not made queen for such a time? Esther understood. It wasn't about security, comfort, or status. It was about purpose. She replied, "Go, gather all the Jews together and fast for me for 3 days and nights. I and my servants will fast too. After that, I will go to the king, even if it costs me my life. And if I perish, so perish." 3 days passed. Esther, dressed in her royal robes, entered the presence of the king. Her heart was racing, the risk was real, but God was with her. The king extended his scepter toward her and said, "What do you want, my queen? I will give you up to half the kingdom." Esther wisely did not say everything right away. She invited the king and Haman to a banquet. At the banquet, she prepared the moment. After another invitation, she revealed the truth. "My people are marked for death, and I am one of them." The king, furious, demanded to know who had done this. And Esther pointed out, it was Haman. Haman was condemned, and the Jewish people were saved. Thanks to Esther's courage, God turned the death sentence into salvation. What seemed like the end turned into deliverance. The impossible became a miracle. A young orphan, an unlikely queen, became God's instrument to save a nation. But the story was not over yet. The old decree of death could not be revoked. But now Esther and Mordecai had the king's trust. A new decree was sent to all the provinces of the empire. The Jews were allowed to defend themselves. The people rose up with courage. And on that day appointed for destruction, it was the enemies who were defeated. Those who were persecuted won. The people celebrated with feasts, dancing, and joy. Mordecai became the second most powerful man in the kingdom. And Esther, her name became eternal, a symbol of faith, courage, and purpose. All because a young woman dared to trust God more than fear. When you feel like you have no voice, that you have no strength, remember Esther. God uses the unlikely to accomplish the impossible. And perhaps today He is calling you to something much greater than you can imagine. So that people would never forget what God did at that time, a new celebration was created, the Feast of Purim. A day that was not born of force, but of faith. A feast that reminds us that God does not abandon His people, even when He seems silent. Every year the Jews celebrated with joy, sending gifts and sharing food with those in need, remembering that salvation came unexpectedly through an unlikely woman. After the great victory, the king elevated Mordecai to a position of honor. The same man who had once been despised now became second in command throughout the empire. Mordecai did not seek power. He sought to do what was right. His integrity, his faith, and his faithfulness were recognized before all, and God's people prospered under his care and leadership. This part of the story teaches us something profound. Sometimes God allows humiliation before He delivers exaltation. True honor does not come from men, it comes from God. And those who remain faithful, even when no one is looking, are the ones He raises up to transform generation. What happened to Esther was not just an act of courage. It was the birth of a legacy. Her decision not only saved God's people in that generation, it inspired faith in countless others throughout history. Esther's name was remembered among kings and prophets, among wise men and servants, and she continues to be remembered today as a symbol of faith, courage, and purpose. She did not seek fame, she sought obedience, and that was enough for God to write her name in eternity. Sometimes our greatest mission is not to shout. It is to stand firm, even in silence. Esther shows us that a life in God's hands is never too small to change the world. The story of Esther is not just about a throne or a decree. It is about identity, about courage, about the right time. It reminds us that God can use precisely what you think is small, worthless, and invisible to fulfill a great purpose. Maybe today you feel hidden, forgotten, far from the plan, but God does not forget those who trust in Him. He works behind the scenes, even when you don't see it. If He could raise an orphan and transform her into a queen, He can also raise you, at the right time, to something that will bless many lives. Trust, wait, and be willing to obey, because maybe you are exactly where you need to be. If this message spoke to you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Here, at Palabra Pura y Simples, each biblical story is a lesson in courage, faith, and purpose. May God bless you, and until the next video.